Ebuka loved her so much, but he could never marry her, not because she cheated, not because she lied, but because she wasn't Catholic. That was how it all ended. A love so pure, a love that felt like home, a love that could have lasted forever, destroyed by religion. But before the heartbreak, before the tears, before Madame Nkechi's stern voice reminded him, "You must marry a Catholic girl, my son," there was happiness. There was Amaka. 4 years ago. The first time Ebuka saw Amaka, it was on a hot Lagos afternoon. The ocean breeze at Elegushi Beach danced around her flowing Ankara gown. She was barefoot, her toes buried in the sand, laughing at the waves crashing against her feet. He didn't believe in love at first sight, but that day he did. "Guy, just go and talk to her," his friend Chike nudged him. Ebuka smiled. "You think it's that easy?" But somehow it was. He walked up to her, and before he could even say anything, she turned to him and grinned. "You've been staring at me for the past 10 minutes, she said. "Do I look like a mermaid?" Ebuka chuckled. "If you were a mermaid, I would let you drag me into the ocean." That was how it started. A love that felt like forever. From that day, they were inseparable. They explored the beauty of West Africa together. Hand in hand, they walked through the historical streets of Badagry, whispering stories of the past. They danced under the stars at the Calabar Carnival, their laughter mixing with the sound of drums. They tasted the richest jollof rice in Accra, argued about who made it better, Nigeria or Ghana, and always ended in laughter. When Amaka had to return to the United Kingdom, they promised to make it work. Distance could not break them. Time could not change them. But something else did. Something they never saw coming. The unseen enemy. Religion Ebuka had always known his mother, Madame Nkechi, was a strong Catholic. But he never thought it would be a problem until the day she called him. "Ebuka, come home," she said. "We need to talk." He traveled to Enugu, thinking it was about work or maybe family matters. But when he stepped into their living room, he saw a girl sitting there. A beautiful Igbo girl, dressed in a flowing Catholic choir gown. His mother beamed. "Meet Chidinma. She's from a good Catholic home, just like you." Ebuka frowned. "Mama, what's this?" His mother's smile faded. "You think I don't know? That girl you're talking to, Amaka? She's Pentecostal. How will she understand our way of worship? How will she raise your children?" That was the beginning of the end. Amaka tried. She read books about Catholicism. She even visited a Catholic church in London. But she didn't understand it. She didn't feel connected to it. And she didn't want to pretend. One night, on a video call, she wiped her tears and whispered, "Ebuka, if I'm not Catholic, does it mean I don't deserve to be loved by you?" Ebuka's heart shattered because he knew he loved her. Ebuka closed his eyes, gripping his phone as Amaka's question echoed in his head. "If I'm not Catholic, does it mean I don't deserve to be loved by you?" He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell her that love was all that mattered. But was it? For weeks, his mother had drilled it into his head. Marriage is not just love, my son. Marriage is culture. Marriage is family. Marriage is faith. Faith! That was where they clashed. Despite the pressure, Ebuka and Amaka refused to let go. They still called each other every night. They still sent each other voice notes filled with laughter and dreams of a future. When Amaka visited Nigeria again, they traveled to Obudu Mountain Resort in Cross River. They stood at the highest peak, the wind cold against their faces. "Let's run away," Amaka joked, holding his hands. Ebuka smiled, but deep down, he knew running wouldn't change anything. A week later, he took her to Nike Lake in Enugu. They sat by the water, feeding the fish, pretending life was simple. But it wasn't. "Ebuka, will you fight for us?" Amaka asked. "Or will you let them win?" He stammered. Back home, his mother was relentless. Every Sunday, she dressed in her finest Catholic attire, a richly patterned aquete wrapper, her head wrapped in a scarf so high it demanded respect. Every time she walked into church, she was reminded of her mission, to find her son a proper Catholic wife. One night, after Mass, she sat with Ebuka. "Do you think love is everything?" she asked. "My son, marriage is bigger than love. One day, love will not be enough. When problems come, when children come, when your family needs spiritual guidance, what will happen?" Ebuka clenched his fists. "Mama, Amaka is a good woman. She loves me. I love her." "Then let her become Catholic," his mother shouted, shaking her head. "A house divided will not stand, Ebuka. Choose wisely." Amaka called that night. Her voice was different. "I read everything about Catholicism," she said. "I tried, Ebuka, but I don't understand it. I don't connect to it. And I can't change who I am." His chest tightened. "Then we will make it work," he whispered. She went silent. Then, finally, she said something that shattered his soul. "Will we?" He had no answer. And in that silence, they both realized the truth. Love was not enough. The next morning, Amaka blocked his number. She didn't hate him. She didn't blame him. She just couldn't keep fighting for a love that had already lost. She knew there was no point. They were only going themselves more hurt. At first, Ebuka thought it was a mistake. He refreshed his chat. He tried calling. "The number you are trying to reach is unavailable." Unavailable. Just like their love. Just like that, everything they had built for 4 years. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Amaka disappeared from his life like she had never been there. No texts, no calls, not even a post on social media. Ebuka felt like a ghost, haunting his own memories. He saw her everywhere, in the crowded streets of Enugu, in the smell of roasted corn and coconuts they used to buy, in the sound of Davido's love songs, which now felt like knives to his chest. But he never saw her. She was gone. In London, Amaka was drowning in her own pain. She thought cutting him off would help, but it only made her miss him more. Every time she passed a Nigerian restaurant, she remembered how they argued about whose jollof rice was better. Every time she saw a beach, she remembered Lagos, the sun, the waves, and the boy who once promised her forever. But promises were just words, and words couldn't fight his mother's will. One night, after months of silence, Amaka's phone buzzed. A text from Ebuka. "I still love you," he said. Her hands shook. She stared at the message for a long time. Did she still love him? Yes. But love was never the problem. She typed her response carefully, tears falling onto the screen. "Amaka, then tell me, Ebuka, do you love me enough to fight for us?" She hit send, and she waited. But this time, he didn't reply. Ebuka read Amaka's message over and over again. "Do you love me enough to fight for us?" His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to tell her he would fight, to defy his mother, his church, and everything standing between them. But deep down, he knew he had already lost the battle before it began, because fighting for her meant betraying his family, and choosing his family meant losing her forever. The next Sunday, he sat beside Madame Nkechi in church, listening to the priest talk about faith, marriage, and the importance of unity in worship. "A man and a woman must be of one faith," the priest preached. "For how can two walk together unless they agree?" His mother nodded in approval. But Ebuka, he felt like he couldn't breathe. He walked out of the church mid-service, ignoring the stairs. Outside, the sky was clear, the air still. But inside him, A storm raged. Could he really let Amaka go? Amaka sat by her window, phone in hand, staring at the message that never came. He wasn't going to reply. And now she had her answer. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered to herself, "Love is not enough." She had done everything. She had tried to understand his world, his faith, but he had never tried to understand hers. She wiped her tears. It was time to move on. 3 years later, Ebuka's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He opened it, and his heart stopped. "You are invited to the wedding of Amaka and..." He couldn't read the rest. His hands trembled. His chest tightened. She was getting married. To another man. A man who didn't have to fight his family to love her. A man who had chosen her without hesitation. And for the first time in years, Ebuka realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life. That night, he sat alone in his apartment in Enugu, staring at the wedding invite. No tears, no anger, just emptiness. Love had never been the problem. Courage was. And in the end, he didn't have enough of it to fight for the woman he loved. So he lost her forever. 3 weeks before Amaka's wedding, Ebuka sat alone in his apartment, staring at the invitation on his table. He couldn't breathe. For years, he convinced himself that letting Amaka go was the right choice. That time would heal him. But time had only done one thing. It showed him that he had never stopped loving her. And now, he was about to lose her forever. Unless he stopped the wedding. The next morning, Ebuka booked a flight to London. He had no plan, no idea what he was going to say. All he knew was that if he didn't try now, he would regret it for the rest of his life. But would Amaka still want him? 2 days before the wedding, Amaka was at a bridal shop, trying on her wedding dress. She looked beautiful, perfect. But as she stared at her reflection in the mirror, she felt something strange. A feeling she had tried so hard to ignore. Something was missing. Or rather, someone. "You're happy, right?" her best friend, Ifeoma, asked. Amaka forced a smile. "Of course I am." But her heart whispered a different answer. Then her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She hesitated, then picked up. "Hello?" A deep voice filled the line. "Amaka, it's me." Her heart stopped. Ebuka. That evening, they met at a quiet cafe in London. Ebuka looked at her like a dying man seeing water for the first time. Amaka? She felt like she was in a dream. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said the words she never thought she'd hear. "Amaka, I was wrong. I should have fought for us. I should have told my mother that I wanted you, not some Catholic wife. I was a coward." "Ebuka, why now?" she asked. His voice broke. "Because I still love you. Because I don't want to lose you." Amaka did something unexpected. She burst into tears. Because this was what she had prayed for. But it was too late. The next morning, Amaka stood in front of a church, wedding bells ringing in the distance. Her heart was in a war. Ebuka or her fiancé, love or stability. One choice could change her life forever. She took a deep breath. Then she stepped forward. The wedding bells echoed through the air. Guests were seated. The choir was singing softly, and Amaka stood at the entrance of the grand church in London. Her heart was racing. In her hands, she clutched the bouquet tightly, but her mind was somewhere else, somewhere with Ebuka. His words still played in her head. "I still love you. I should have fought for us." Was it too late? Behind her, her father held her arm, waiting to walk her down the aisle. Her groom stood at the altar, smiling nervously. But Amaka, she was drowning in confusion. The choir began to sing louder, signaling her to take the first step. She took a deep breath. Then, just as she was about to move, the doors of the church burst open. A collective gasp filled the room. And there, standing at the entrance, was Ebuka, dressed in a black suit, eyes filled with desperation, chest rising and falling as if he had run the entire way. "Amaka, don't do this." The entire church fell into silence. Her groom stiffened. Her father's grip on her arm tightened. Madame Nkechi, sitting in the front row, turned pale. But Amaka, her heart stopped. Tears welled up in her eyes as she whispered, "Ebuka, what are you doing here?" He stepped forward, voice trembling. "I know I should have said this years ago, but I can't let you marry someone else. I love you. And if love isn't enough, then I'm willing to change, to learn, to fight. For you." A tear slipped down her cheek. Her fiancé, looking stunned, finally spoke. "Amaka, do you still love him?" Every eye in the church was on her. Time seemed to freeze. And in that moment, Amaka knew. Her next words would change everything. The weight of the moment pressed against Amaka's chest like an iron grip. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Ebuka stood before her, pleading, desperate, hopeful. Her fiancé stood beside the priest, tense, waiting, afraid. Madame Nkechi clutched her rosary so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her son was embarrassing the family in a Catholic church. The crowd whispered. And Amaka? She closed her eyes. For years, she had dreamed of this day. Her wedding, her white dress, her happily ever after. But in none of those dreams did she imagine choosing between two men. Then she finally spoke. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air like a dagger. But who was she talking to? Ebuka? Or her fiancé? Tears streamed down Amaka's face as she turned to her fiancé. "You're a good man, a kind man, but I can't marry you." Gasps echoed in the church. Her groom's face fell, but deep down he already knew. Then she turned to Ebuka. His face lit up with hope. But Amaka shook her head. "And I can't be with you either." The color drained from Ebuka's face. "Amaka, what?" She wiped her tears, her voice shaking but strong. "I spent years trying to fit into a love that wasn't meant to be. I tried to understand Catholicism. I tried to move on. I tried to forget. But love shouldn't be forced. And now, I just want to find myself." Madame Nkechi nearly collapsed. Ebuka looked shattered. Her ex-fiancé exhaled in relief and pain at the same time. And Amaka, for the first time in her life, she felt free. She dropped her bouquet, lifted her dress slightly, and walked out of the church. Not toward Ebuka, not toward another man, but toward herself. Because love is beautiful, but sometimes loving yourself is the greatest choice of all. She wanted to get married because she thought she could find peace, not because she actually loved the man. All this while, she has just been confused, but on the wedding day was when Amaka knew what she actually wanted. 1 year later, Amaka sat at a cafe in Accra, Ghana, sipping her favorite hibiscus tea. She had spent months traveling across West Africa, Lagos, Abidjan, Dakar, rediscovering herself, falling in love with life again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ebuka. "I hope you're happy. I'll always love you." She smiled softly, then typed back, "I am. I hope you are too." She hit send. Then she put her phone away because for the first time in her life, she didn't need love to complete her. She was already whole. 5 years later, Ebuka sat at a restaurant in Victoria Island, Lagos, sipping his drink, watching the waves crash against the shore. It was supposed to be just another evening. But then he saw her, Amaka. She was sitting at a table by the window, laughing softly as she talked to a man who was not him, her husband. She looked happy, and that hurt more than anything. For years he had imagined seeing her again. He thought maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over, that fate would bring them back together. But here she was, smiling at another man, the way she used to smile at him. And Ebuka realized the truth. He was just a memory to her now. For a moment, their eyes met. Her smile faded, and in her eyes, he saw something, not regret, not anger, but peace. She gave him a small nod, a silent goodbye. And just like that, she turned back to her husband, her new life. Ebuka took a deep breath, stood up, and walked away. And because sometimes love was just never enough.